Okay, we are back live with another Between the Pages book chat. And today we have fantasy author Christopher Keene here to discuss his book, War of Kings and Monsters. So I will let you introduce yourself. So take it away.
Well, as you said, I'm Christopher Keene. I'm a New Zealand author, and I write science fiction and fantasy mostly. I also write in the subgenre lit RPG, which is games in literature essentially. And I have been lately doing a publishing course to try and go onto the publisher side of things, but mainly I still like focusing on my work. And my latest book was released, I think, last June or July. But yeah, that's the one I've been trying to promote lately.
Okay, so why don't you give us an overview of the book?
All right, here we go. Well, War of Kings and Monsters is essentially Pokemon in an epic fantasy setting. It was like an epic fantasy sort of situation going on. You've got wars, you've got magic, you've got dragons. But the idea is that the reason why it's like Pokemon is because the world, the epic fantasy world, is parallel to another world where there are these beings called Maokai. And the Maokai are, in their world, they're like spirits. But when they get called into our world, they gain physical form and they become monsters. And what happens is there are, I guess you'd call them magicians in the epic fantasy world who call forth these Maokai, and they implant their spirit into objects called pact items. And when they choose, they can essentially summon the monster through these pact items to fight on their behest. And the reason why they're called pact items is because in order for a Maokai and essentially a caller, as they're called in this world, to work together, they have to have a pact, because normally these monsters wouldn't fight for humans. They'd normally kill them. They'd normally like come through, if unbidden, they'd come through and kill them and eat them or whatever. But if they make a pact, it's essentially the idea that there's a connection, a common will between the Maokai and the caller. And so when that pact is made, they basically say, okay, you can come into our world, you can live in our world, because their world is awful. There's no material, there's no will. It's just, they're basically like ghosts there. They have no interaction. So when they come into our world, but they have to behave and they have to act on the will of the callers. And the idea is that these monsters, these Maokai, have been used for wars in the past. They've been used for essentially, people fighting, competing, and by monster battles, essentially, very similar to Pokemon. The gimmick of it is that, like with the idea of the Pokeball containing the Pokemon, is that in this world the packed item can be almost anything. It can be it can be any physical object, and so people are always looking for what is the most convenient item at hand, whether it be a glove. Some people even use their own pets or animals themselves as the packed item, so they can have like a dog with them that can transform into a bigger monster, which is always fun. And there are even some people that use their own bodies as packed items, so they themselves can transform into a monster. And but of course, each one of these things have different consequences, and so a lot of people generally make the packed items out of objects that they can have on them, like a staff or a cape or something they don't need to use during battle. There's quite a funny scene where one of the characters that you meet, his sword is a packed item, and when he summons his monster from a sword, he's like, "Oh no, I don't have my sword anymore. I can't actually defend myself." And so that's the premise of the magic system in the world. That the conflict going on is essentially this idea that, as I said, there's been wars fought with these Maokai, and essentially they kind of made they've hit a stalemate where they can no longer, there's no advantage to be found, and so they've made a continuous peace treaty between the two kingdoms. But what they've found out recently at the start of the book is that the barrier between their world and the Maokai and the world of the Maokai is breaking. It's like the barrier between the two worlds is coming apart, and Maokai are slowly coming in unbidden, and they need to essentially that because the idea is that the world of the Maokai wasn't originally there. That was created by magicians a long time ago. Essentially, they created essentially a touchstone for this magic, a relic that created this boundary, and it was broken in two. And the main character has one of the halves, and he must find the other half in order to reseal the barrier between them. And the one kingdom essentially wants to avoid the monsters coming in and killing everyone. The other kingdom is like, this could be the advantage we've been looking for to win the war, to find a way we can get over the other kingdom. And so that is essentially the two ambitions of the main characters. There are two main point of view characters, and they're both from the different kingdoms, and one's trying to find the other half of the artifact in order to control the Maokai that come through, and the other one is trying just to seal them away to stop the threat. And those two are both sent to find each other and the other half of the artifact. And I won't spoil it, but they're related somehow.
Okay, so you mentioned that the objects disappear. So the objects themselves actually transform into the monsters?
Yep, that's right. They morph. It's fantasy, so it's very Harry Potter. Like, you get a staff that would turn into a giant snake, or a cape and cowl that turns into a giant bat. Yeah.
Oh, that's cool. Anyway, so what's your world like? I mean, it sounds like it might be a little medieval, the epic fantasy part anyway. So describe your world.
Yeah, well, it's a classic medieval fantasy. It's a classic castles and dragons and wide plains of grass and forests and oceans and mountains. Just very, very not very original. I'll admit, but really, I don't know. I've always had a romantic kind of feeling about those landscapes. The fantasy sort of genre has to provide. I like that time. I like the threat of plague that's always on the background. It's kind of, I guess you would say, it's like that sort of timeline. It's the medieval kind of, Dark Ages sort of era.
Yeah, okay. So
Pretty generic for fantasy.
I don't know. I think a lot of medieval time period is standard more than generic.
Yeah, that's what I mean. It's like the reason, I mean, I just wanted to kind of make my own kind of put my own stamp on it in a way, because I've always loved books set in that sort of setting. I really wanted to write my own and give it a little bit of a twist, just a little bit of a twist. And for me, the monster summoning angle, I just was like, yep, I want that. I want that in a medieval fantasy world. I want that to be the main form of magic. And there are a lot of other books that do it. Jim Butcher has a book series called Codex Alera, very similar. I think Terry Matharu has one. It's called the Summoner series or something. There are similar ones out there like it. But I don't think any of them have done the packed item, sort of the way that I've kind of nailed down this hard magic system related to the spirits, the objects, and how they interact with the masters. And it's all kind of grounded in this backstory that I don't want to actually say, no spoilers, but you'll see if you read it.
Okay, so you mentioned Pokemon, so I'm assuming that's an inspiration. But what else was inspired the book?
Well, mainly my partner, because she really loved. As I said, she really liked Pokemon. That was like one of her biggest fandoms. She also liked Zoids and what is it? If you've never heard of Zoids, it's basically like a giant mecha, like giant robots. that people pilot that look kind of like monsters. They look like lions or dinosaurs or something like that, and they fight them, and it's good fun. And for me, I was like, okay, how can I create a magic system whereby I can combine those two elements together, like the idea of the summoning the Pokemon or using the Zoids. And then, like, for me, the idea is that in this system that I've created with the packed items and the objects, is that when you create a packed item, the item that you choose is inevitably influenced by the spirit of the monster that you've got in there. And so the idea for me is that if I were to write a sequel, it wouldn't be a direct sequel, but I could still use the same magic system set in a future tense, whereby the objects, like robots, become the vessels of these demonic spirits, and then end up changing to look like them, much like Zoids. So for me, it had the best of both worlds in there.
Also cool.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, for me, that's what I love about this magic system. It's so versatile. Like, if you put it into a different situation where there are different objects, different power sources or whatever, like, suddenly you've got unlimited potential.
Okay, so tell us a little bit about the main character.
Right, Nathan. Okay, so Nathan is the classic naive character to begin with. He is essentially never been out behind his walls to start with. He has been warned of the danger of the outside world, because there's always a chance that these monsters will slip into his world and start ripping people apart. So as a young man, he's essentially been behind the walls, learning how to essentially become cooler so that he can go outside into the wide world and summon monsters to defend himself. And in a way, he gets called on to go outside on this adventure a little prematurely. He's quite young. He's like 15. He's not really ready. But they've kind of got no choice, because he is of, I guess you would call it, he is a descendant of the magicians that originally sealed away the Maokai. And so he's the only one who can use the artifact to the same degree. And what's interesting about him is that he's quite friendly. Like, he's not an edgy character. He's very open and honest and sincere. And this conflicts with the other point of view character, who was brought up in a very cruel and critical and challenging environment, whereby the Maokai were always considered, because Nathan sees his Maokai as kind of a friend, because he's lived with them, he's decided to kind of see him that way. Whereas the other character, she only sees Maokai as weapons. They're only tools for a means. And when these two characters kind of clash, their ideologies are completely different. Like the way they think and the way they want to use essentially the artifact and take advantage of this portal to this world full of demons. Like, what are they going to do? Are they going to seal it away to stop the threat entirely, or are they going to use it to try and take over? And because she is, she was brought up in such a battle-hardened environment, in such a cruel, cutting situation, that she clearly thinks that whatever gives her power to prevent that is something that she's more inclined to want to lean toward. And so you've got these two characters who are very different, who are, follow the naive and the hardened sort of tropes, and they clash, and they also have like a common history. And for me, they act as good foils for each other. So in a way, it's kind of like talking about Batman and the Joker. You always think of like, who would be the best foil for a naive person, someone who, is friendly and sincere and, would believe most people even if they lied to them. I think the best foil for that is someone who's cynical, someone who, isn't so trusting, who is, more inclined to snap at people if they do something silly. So yeah, I created Nathan and the girl character Lane as opposites in that regard. And in a way, that is kind of the core of the character in the two main characters in the story, is that difference in upbringing and how it's affected them.
Okay, so what was the hardest scene or type of scene for you to write in the book?
Well, the idea is that there's a huge backstory to the magic and one of the characters, and I had to rewrite a flashback to because I originally wrote two books, 500 years apart, and the first book was the backstory to the book that we've got now, and so it's like what they say. It's like an iceberg. You know, you only see the floating bit. You know, the rest of it's underneath. And so I had to essentially whittle down this entire book into one flashback and a few mentions in, you know, the book that is published. And so I had to rewrite a chapter to reveal as much as possible in a few scenes, and that was quite difficult. That was a real challenge. And really it kind of shows how like one of the characters, like he's not even a main character, but he's kind of like a background character who you realize is more important as the story goes on. He essentially got stuck in the Malchiron, and in the Malchiron, because there's no material, it's just ethereal. Time works differently, and so he comes into our world pretty much the same as he looked when he went in, but 500 years have passed, and so he's witnessed history, if you will. He's kind of faced the evil of his time, come back and seen it return, and he knows what they're dealing with, and so he's a bit more driven, and he helps the main character. He's kind of like the teacher figure in a way, and his chapter, it's from his point of view, this flashback chapter, having to encompass his entire life and his entire story into this one chapter where he is finally facing his adversary, this big baddie. It was very difficult to write.
Okay, so what was your favorite scene to write in the book?
Favorite scene? Well, that's a hard one. I'll tell you my second favorite scene, because the first favorite scene is a spoiler. The idea is that this happens before the halfway point, so I can tell you. Anyway, the idea is that this character I was telling you about in the flashback sequence, his name's Asik, and he when he was in the Malchiron, when he was in the other world, in order to survive, he had to kind of fuse his spirit with the Malkai, and so when he came back, he had the Malkai of a dragon in him, and there's a scene when essentially he's fighting this guy who's possessed by a Malkai as well, and like he decides to turn into a dragon all of a sudden. He just says, right, well, I'm sure you what I can do, because his body is now a packed item in this world. And he uses his own body as a packed item, and therefore can transform into the Malkai that he kind of been joined with and made a pact with. And so now he just transforms into this dragon. And it's just one of the most epic scenes, because the guy he's fighting is possessed by a Malkai, but he looks like he is like the classic White Knight character. Like he's the classic White Knight, and so you've got this imagery of the White Knight fighting the death and dragon. You know, classic medieval fantasy imagery. Yet the good guy is the dragon, and the bad guy is the White Knight. So you've crossed the tropes around. And
for me, I like that.
Yeah, exactly. That for me, that was like such a thrill, just like to be able to play with those tropes in such a way, because I'm like, this is the amazing thing when I discovered this, like when I didn't discover it, when I thought of this magic system, like there's so many things you can do with it. Yeah, and that was one of the things I really enjoyed.
Okay, so are any of your secondary characters a little quirky or scene stealers?
Yeah, there's a girl called Kendra who I guess a lot of people enjoy because she's quite quirky. She's the love interest, really. My book isn't really a romance, but she's the closest thing to a love interest of a main character, and she's quite lighthearted, quite funny. Essentially, like, because it's 2 point of views, she starts off with Lane, the girl character, the girl point of view character, and they're crossing a bridge, and a landslide happens, and just as they're about to make it to the bridge, she ends up sliding on her butt down this giant hill that the bridge is, leaned up against, built into. And from the main character's point of view, Nathan, he's walking underneath the bridge. And so the introduction is him going, like, he's lost. He's like, I don't know where I am. There's no one I can talk to. I'm so alone. And he, like, puts his arms out, and she just drops into him. And he's like, where'd you come from? And so that was a funny scene. And, like, she's just kind of like, yeah, that's just my day. Yeah.
Okay, so you also write a lit RGB,
Yeah.
Okay, a lit
P.
GP. Okay, I can't pronounce that today, apparently. Series. So tell us a little bit about that.
My lit RPG series is the Dream State Saga. It started Stuck in the Game. Stuck in the Game was my first book that I got published. I wrote it on a dare. My mate, basically I was complaining about the classic main character stuck in a video game type scenario story, and there were just so many of them, and they were all I thought they were all done so terribly, and my mate dared me to write one that did better, and so I did, and it was the first book I got published. It got picked up by Future House Publishing in 2015, and that got published, and so it follows the general sort of structure of a guy stuck in a video game. But I always, there were a lot of things I had problems with that story when I read it from other people or watched it from other people. And I was always trying to figure out ways that I could get around those plot holes. The plot hole that always got me was the fact that they always say it's a VR, virtual reality game, where you put on your little visor and suddenly you're in this world. And they gave the illusion that all you'd have to do is lie down and have a controller or something. And that for me just seemed really unimmersive. It just the idea of you just lying down and there's no sensory input. There's all you've got is visual. And to me, that seemed a bit limiting. Maybe, you've got headphones, so you've got visual and audio, but that's about it. And so I was trying to figure out a way which it could be more immersive. And the way I saw it is that the closest means I could think of that's more kind of reality-based was dreams. Was that dreams are a simulation of reality in your head that cover all the bases. You've got touch, you've got all the sensory input. And so, but you've got the illusion of moving, you've got the illusion of movement, you've got the illusion of everything while you're not doing anything. And so for me, I tried to create a game system which basically use that. Basically, the way the game works, it's very science fiction BS, but you take a pill and it puts you in kind of a lucid dream like state. And you wear this helmet which has a micro MRI in it, and it basically scans your brain, and it gives you certain pulses or prompts or influences that creates a template of this world that other people in their own dreams are sharing. And so basically you explore this world using this drug, and the system puts you in this world with other people. You can interact with them, and it's very like a realistic game, probably more realistic than a dream would allow, but it's fun to think about anyway. In that respect, I thought that was a cool interface for the main character to use while he was paralyzed.
Okay, so I think we'll wrap it up here. And I'd like to thank you for joining us today. And why don't you tell everyone where they can find you and your books?
Just look me up on Amazon, Christopher Keene, Keene, or Facebook. I got a blog, fantasyandanime.wordpress.com. Just Amazon, Stuck in the Game, or Working the Monsters. Those are the two.
Okay, so go check out his books. And again, thank you for being here. And we'll be back next weekend with more authors. So join us then. Bye for now.